You can support this project by subscribing on Spotify for £3 a month.
You're listening to the Nostalgia Podcast with myself, Brian Scarf, and my co-host, Sebastian Murillo. How are you doing, Sebastian?
Yeah, I'm all right. I'll be very interested to talk about the Black Virgin in this episode, largely because I've always had an interest, or at least I've always suspected that there was something mysterious and fascinating going on with the Black Madonnas. And early on, when I became a Catholic 15 years ago, quite early on, I remember asking a priest, why are there all of these ancient images of Black Madonnas? And he said, "Oh well, it's just a play on the line from the Song of Songs, 'I am black, but I am beautiful,' and someone picked up on it and started this trend, and that's all it is." And I thought, that's not a very satisfactory answer. I think there's something else going on here. That may be a text that is, wonderfully illustrative, and you can refer to it when supporting the whole tradition of the Black Madonnas, but I think there's something a lot richer and more interesting and mysterious going on here. But of course, it was actually really when you recommended that I study the Jean Hani book, The Black Virgin, that I realized my instincts had been fairly sound, and there was indeed something very rich and interesting going on here.
I feel both excited and a great degree of anxiety approaching this subject, because it feels to me that there's such a magnitude of mystery surrounding the Black Madonnas that it's very hard to imagine doing the subject justice. It's something genuinely that I feel like I'm approaching with fear and trembling, a little bit like Moses and the burning bush, which is a very apt metaphor. It's interesting in myself, having been brought up in a religious environment, you can sometimes become a little bit numb to these images of sort of awe and reverence in the view of the sacred, just from proximity, sometimes an over-familiarity of the subject leading to a kind of contempt. But when it comes to this particular area, it feels so profoundly sacred I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that the Black Madonnas are kind of the fullness and final fulfillment of natural revelation of what can be understood from the book of nature. And interestingly enough, I think that there are many signs, someone like Jean and many of his co-thinkers believe that the Black Madonna is the ancient perennial religious icon of the Celtic people, of the Western European peoples. And that's not even mentioning the analogues which are scattered all over the world of a great virgin mother figure.
Can I just pick up on a couple of things you've just said there, Brian? Because the one thing I think we should just say to our listeners is that we do not plan to exhaust this topic today, because, as you said, it's so big and it's so mysterious, and you're treading on such holy ground that really, if we have just suggested to our listeners that there is something very deep and very profound going on here, I think we've done a good enough job by the end of the podcast.
Absolutely.
And when you say the fulfillment of natural revelation, I think this is precisely why, in the Hermetic Catholic tradition, there is this great love for the Black Virgin. Why? So the moment you said that, I thought of this passage in Valentine Tomberg's Meditations on the Tarot. It's just a couple of sentences, and it's quite a famous passage, so many people will know it. But what he says is, quote, "We Hermeticists are theologians of that holy scripture revealing God, which is named the world. Similarly, theologians of the Holy Scripture revealing God are Hermeticists insofar as they dedicate their effort to the glory of God. And just as the world is not only a material body, but is also soul and spirit, so is the Holy Scripture not simply the dead letter, but it is soul and spirit." So what he is essentially saying is that you've got these two types of theologian. You've got the theologian who studies God's divine revelation in Holy Scripture and the commentaries on Holy Scripture by the fathers, etc., etc. But you have another kind of theologian who dedicates himself to the study of God's primordial revelation, which is the cosmos. And if the mystery of the Black Madonna is bound up with God revealing himself in the cosmos, and hopefully we're going to get into that a little bit in the coming minutes, then you could understand why the Hermetic tradition would have this very deep devotion to her.
It's worth pointing out that after my episode, our chat with Father Robert Nixon a few weeks ago, we had a number of people ask for some help to understand something that Father Nixon said, which was during the Middle Ages, doctrine had a much more fluid structure. And I think that the Black Madonna may be perhaps the best example of this fluid doctrinal structure, because the official doctrinal statements of the Church on Mary are quite reserved and quite sober, especially up until the Middle Ages. This is long before proclamations of the Assumption as an official dogmatic position, and the Immaculate Conception as an official dogmatic position. The Church held that Mary was the Mother of God, and a number of other things as well. But in the liturgical expressions of the Church, there was another much richer and in some ways much more what would you say, much more ambitious set of claims and devotions to a Mary that's not immediately obvious in the official doctrinal structure. And yet at the same time, the church didn't feel it needed to step in and regularize or impose a structure over the relationship between the two. And it was quite happy for the two modes of pedagogy and praise and preparation of the people to coexist next to each other in this fluid dynamic. And the listener must remember that just because something isn't in a dogmatic statement or a doctrinal statement, but in a liturgical form, doesn't actually make it any lower, because it is, of course, the lex orandi, the lex credendi. That which is believed is that which is prayed. So in some ways, the very structure of religious catechesis is in the prayer itself, something that Eastern Orthodoxy has done a much better job of maintaining.
Well, this is something that we talk about a lot, isn't it? That there is a problem with thinking about revealed religion as exclusively or even preeminently propositional. That the Christian is not first and foremost the person who has the right ideas. The Christian is first and foremost he who worships rightly, and it's through sacramental transformation, it's through being initiated into the sacred mysteries being for the fathers a synonym of sacraments, that we undergo supernatural transformation. And by the way, it's perfectly possible to assent to all of the dogmas and doctrines of the faith and still go to hell. And in fact, there is a wonderful passage in the letter of St. James in which he lists the dogmatic commitments of the church and says, I'll have you know that even the devil believes all of these things because he knows them and they're perfectly true. It's not, however, possible to undergo sacramental transformation so as to become deified and go to hell. Because
but it's literally tautological that to be deified is to become into heaven in your very being. And in fact, I think if people want an explicit example of what this doctrinal fluidity might look like, the hell is a very good example, because the medieval church recognized the terrors of hell to a far greater extent than the church today. The walls of churches were plastered with the sufferings of hell. People's imaginations were very very fertile with the suffering that might go on in something like the Black Plague. They could imagine hell, and it was imagined in some ways as a Hieronymus Bosch painting. I think Hieronymus Bosch isn't doing anything particularly outside of the tradition in his imagery, and yet the inescapability and eternality of hell wasn't underplayed at all. And yet at exactly the same time, a Saint Pope, Saint Celestine V, could collect and write a document of folk tales of the Blessed Virgin Mary, where Mary herself plucks a sinner out of hell because of his devotion to her. And those two things could exist in a fluid tension without needing to be resolved. That's what's meant by a more fluid relationship to dogma in the medieval period, I think.
I think also there was because this is difficult to talk about because it's a subtle subject. But again, as we've discussed in the past, it's a characteristic of the modern mind to privilege abstractions and ideas over concrete realities. And so once you have your neat categories and your ideas and your definitions, it's very easy to believe that you have already got reality worked out. And it may be a dogma that the souls of the damned can never escape hell, and one may be committed to believing that, but it's also a dogma that God is not bound by that. God is not bound by, just as he's not bound, for example, by the sacramental order. If he wants to grant somebody a private revelation and deify them in a single moment, in order to redeem them for all eternity, he can do that. He doesn't need to make the sacraments available to that person. He doesn't need to. Of course, the ordinary means of salvation are to incrementally sanctify us through the course of our lives, through sacraments and through exposure to preaching, both for our instruction and our edification and all of these things. But God's not bound by any of those things. So, and I think what's wonderful about the medieval mind is because, and this is something that's often overlooked, because the medievals were so playful. And if you look at their little details in their cathedrals, the grotesques and the gargoyles and the green men and all of these things, you think about the games that they played and the church ales and all of the ways in which the medievals were filling their lives with play. And any sociologist will tell you that play is essential to becoming fully human. The medievals were able to entertain the way that, if you like, God in his playfulness will interact with his own creation. What I would just say is that one part of your discussion with Father Robert Nixon, which I was sorry not to be able to contribute to because I thought it was just so interesting when I listened to it, but one that I had a slight reservation about, was that he contrasted low mariology with high mariology. And he said that low mariology is the tendency to characterize Mary as a good Jewish mother who made serious sacrifices, went to Bethlehem with her husband, gave birth in a shelter with animals, had to flee to Egypt, but was, as we see from the wedding of Cana, essentially a good Jewish lady who's an important member of the community, and that's how we should think of her. And then high mariology is very much bound up with these. With the history of private devotions and private revelations and folkloric stories and anything from that to, her role at Fatima and Lourdes and all of this kind of thing. And that was characterized as high mariology. And the problem with that is, one, as you know, I don't like spectrum thinking in general. But two, I think it misses out the kind of mariology that I think is pertinent to questions of the Black Madonna, because the mariology that actually interests me is cosmic mariology, who Mary is as incarnation of prima natura, incarnation of the cosmos, as the one who wears the stars, the coronet of stars over her head and the moon under her feet, precisely because she embodies the entire cosmic order. I'm currently reading folk tales from Romania to my children, and in those folk tales that have their own creation accounts, the universe itself is repeatedly referred to as the queen consort of God. The entire universe is the queen consort of God. And that's the kind of mariology which I think actually, after the medieval period, Western Christians and perhaps all Christians have been starved of that kind of mariology. And it's the essential mariology.
So if I was to build a three-way spectrum or build my own, I would interpret low mariology as basically exactly as you described, the Protestant version, which is entirely spiritually blind. I would interpret cosmic mariology as high mariology, And the Mary of private revelations and all of that folkloric element of her as folkloric Mariology, which is cosmic Mariology as received by the simple people and growing into something. So the sophisticated people have their philosophies and their theologies, but ordinary, humble communities of believers exposed to the powers of cosmic Mariology will bring with them the emergence of folkloric Mariology. So the Mary of a private revelation is kind of flowing from this original cosmic Mary.
I mean, I would want to push back on such a negative view of low Mariology. I think that we have to see Mary not only as the embodiment of the cosmic order, the queen consort of God, and the Magna Mater, the great universal mother who intervenes in history all the time for the good of humankind. We have to in some way wed that to the fact that she was a person at a particular time in history who had challenges, who was married to a carpenter, who gave breast milk to her son. Just like we have to see Jesus Christ as the king of the universe, the eternal priest of the order of Melchizedek, who is renewing the whole world eternally from the cross, but who was also a carpenter and got tired on a boat and wept when his friend died. And somehow
I should perhaps have qualified a bit further that low Mary alone among the Protestants often means a Mary who was a sinner. She sinned. She was not a virgin, because. But
that's not even Mariology. That's not low Mariology, because that's not even Mariology.
But that's what Protestants believe, and that's if you don't have high Mariology, you will always end up with something like that.
Yeah, I'm sure that's right.
So the thing is, you may not have any explicit cosmic Mariology, but even the simplest, most unlearned person who believes in the perpetual virginity and sinlessness and immaculate conception has already moved beyond the simple gospel narratives, not in terms of exhausting its information, but in terms of you can sort of hand out the Bible to someone on a desert island, and would everyone come to these dogmatic positions? Well, obviously no, because this is exactly what Protestant is. Protestantism is. It is, I received the Bible last Wednesday, and I've since then been building the Christian religion, regardless of anything that's ever been said before. This is me and my Bible. Now, I'm aware that there are slightly more subtle forms of Protestantism, but they are generally dying, generally extremely liberal in other ways, and the only virulent and living forms of Protestantism are the kind of evangelical fundamentalism that has this bastardized, debased form of Mariology that I think is just the product of Scripture alone.
Well, maybe I don't know. I really wouldn't even call that a species of Mariology. But maybe the distinction between high and low Mariology is helpful here, because I think that there is a high and low Mariology within the tradition of the Black Madonna. So you know, when you come across writings, there are certain particularly more New Agey interests in the tradition of the Black Madonna that want very much to link her with the black-skinned Earth Mother of Celtic and Druidic religion, but also with Isis of Egypt, and these various connections. And there may be very important historical connections there. I don't doubt them, just as I really do think that Mary, being a lady who travelled into Egypt on a donkey, is really, really part of her story and really important. You know, that there may be a historical connection there. and there are fascinating stories about this. For just one example for our listeners, there was a black Madonna that was much venerated in the city of Paris until 1789, when revolutionaries broke into the chapel where this statue was, having built a pyre outside, and burned this statue of the Black Madonna, and which had reportedly been brought to France by returning crusaders in the 12th century. And when they had finished burning the statue, they found a load of Egyptian hieroglyphs on the fire that had been etched into pebbles that were inside the statue. So clearly they had found some ancient statue of Isis, the Crusaders in Egypt, and had brought her back and given her a golden crown and so on, and then venerated her as the Black Madonna. So there are all these kind of interesting connections in this regard. But these stories, I think, don't get to the heart of what the Black Madonna is all about, which is her role as the icon of cosmic mariology, which hopefully we'll get into. But there you might say there is a high and low mariology within this devotion itself.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. Perhaps let's very briefly give an outline of the histories. Isis is, of course, the prototype par excellence of the Black Madonna as Mary. Almost everything that is said of Isis is eventually said of Mary as the Black Madonna. She sits in majesty with the child Horus on her lap, in a way that most people shown an image of both would struggle to distinguish the two. The blackness of Isis is not incidental, but is an integral part of the mysteries of the Egyptian religion. And all of the other black mother goddesses of the Greeks and the Romans and many of the other groups.
And the Hindus.
And the Hindu. Well, I was going to say they go back to the Egyptians.
Right.
I don't know whether there is a prototype beyond those, or whether this just comes from an age of deep spiritual intuition where peoples all over the world came to the same conclusion. And this ultimate highest female Earth Mother, Mother of the Gods, so both an Earth Mother and Mother of the Gods, was venerated all over the ancient world. And interestingly, perhaps one of the most interesting things that I find about this is that it was a central part of the Druidic religion. And in the Druidic centers of Chartres in France and Glastonbury in Britain, this was a fundamental part of the divine feminine cult. And it is believed, and was believed during the Middle Ages, it is known, that in the 100 years in the run-up to when Christ was born in Chartres, the Druids built a temple to the Virgin who would give birth. Yeah. And there was enthroned a great image of a pregnant virgin at Chartres. And we have inscriptions to this from antiquity, and it was believed to be such an important part of proto-revelation or pagan revelation that one of the 15th century missals produced at Chartres integrated this prophecy into its prayers, because it was so clearly part of God's plan that would then become a center of Marian devotion for the proper revelation of this of this Mother of God and Mother Earth combined, the fullness of the highest and the lowest. And this is not only true at Chartres and Glastonbury, but is true of all of the great 12th and 13th century Notre Dames. So wherever there is a Notre Dame cathedral from that era, there was almost certainly a great pagan cult to the highest divine feminine, which was then translated into a devotion or to the cosmic Mary. So I think that's particularly interesting, and it shows the degree to which the medieval mind just integrated the good from paganism. And I've actually spent a lot of time thinking about this, because in the Old Testament there are some very negative remarks towards the idea of the divine feminine. There's a condemnation of the Queen of Heaven. I don't know if you're familiar with the works of Margaret Baker. Well, her entire academic career is essentially going to show that there were at various stages devotions to the Queen of Heaven, to the divine feminine, to this goddess figure who is the spouse of the God of the Hebrews, but it was repeatedly condemned, and the cult was destroyed. The Asherah poles, the high places, all of these things repeatedly destroyed, and this is something that Protestants use against Catholics. And it seems to me that this is bound up in the mystery of the fall in Eden. So in Eden, we have the tree of knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life. But interestingly, in ancient Babylon, the tree of life was called the divine lady of Eden. And so this is the context within which the tree of life needs to be understood. It wasn't only that in the southern part of Babylonia, she was known as the Lady of the Vine, and the vine was the Sumerian sign for life. Now, when Adam and Eve have to leave the garden, when they're exiled from this early paradise, a great angel with a fiery sword is set to guard the garden, in particular to stop them from approaching the tree of life. So if the tree of life is associated with the divine lady of Eden, the divine feminine, and then an angel comes along and shuts that off to humanity, and that comes in, and along with that, the earth is cursed. It no longer fertile, doesn't produce fruit easily anymore. It has to be worked by the sweat of the brow. And the woman can't give birth easily anymore. She's going to give birth in pain. All the feminine aspects of the cosmic reality have been utterly destroyed. And the tree of life, I mean, this is not an arbitrary thing. In the ancient symbolic mind, the tree was the axis mundi that bound together heaven and earth. It pulled the highest and the lowest, the transcendent and the immanent together. And the correlation between the tree and the womb of Mary is also very close, because it's in the womb of Mary that heaven and earth, according to the great liturgical exclamations of the church, are bound together. And so the womb is the place of birth, and also it is the cave of death. And this is why when we go into a church or a cathedral, we're entering into a great Marian structure, the place where the Christ child is born, but we also go under the tympanum of judgment, because it is also the place of death, where our catafalque will be as we have our final requiem, the place of birth and death. So sorry, that was a little bit of a rant and a tangent.
Not at all.
But my point is that as Adam and Eve are exiled from Eden, they are separated from the divine lady of Eden. And then you have the devouring kind of evil mother goddesses who demand that newborn children are thrown into the fire, and that whores herself out, and you have temple prostitution. You get this evil whore. It's the other woman of scriptures. There's two great women talked about
Lilith.
from the beginning. Yeah, exactly. From beginning to end, you've got the Eve and the the second Eve and the cosmic Mary of Revelation 12, but also you've got the whore in Revelations, and all the way through Scripture, Israel, whenever it's unfaithful to Christ, is constantly being compared to a whore. It's the ultimate humiliation to be called this. And you've got the Jezebels, and you've got the wicked goddesses, the Asherahs, who are demanding these unbearable prices for worship. And so as mankind is thrown out of Eden until the coming of Mary, there's this massive vacuum where there is no place for the divine feminine, and it's kind of guarded by an angel with a fiery flame. And so there are understandings of that office, which is why all of the titles given to Isis and all of the hymns and the poetry have real beauty and truth. But the beings that hold these offices are usurpers, and the divine feminine remains hidden and locked behind the fiery sword of the angel.
Although in the Old Testament, you do have a prefiguration of the role of Mary in the wisdom literature, because you have you have wisdom, the wisdom of God, in the created order, being talked about exclusively in feminine terms. So what we know is that God creates the world, and he holds it in being, animating it with his wisdom. And that wisdom that animates the created order is of itself feminine. That you have the whole universe animated by divine Sophia, right? And this is deep in the wisdom literature. Every time wisdom is talked about as a person in the Old Testament, it's in the feminine. And in fact, this so disturbed some of the fathers that when they made their own translations of the wisdom literature, they insisted on referring to the wisdom of God as masculine. And Saint Jerome, of course, famously questioned whether much of the wisdom literature was really canonical at all. And even as late as someone like Louis de Montfort, who is considered a kind of preeminent mariologist in the mid to late modern age, he was writing in the 19th century, I think it was, maybe the 18th century. Louis de Montfort repeatedly, in his commentaries on the wisdom literature, refers to the wisdom of God as masculine, which is very interesting if you think about it, because he's the mariologist, and yet he's constantly referring to the wisdom of God in the wisdom literature as masculine, but the text itself, the canonical text, doesn't say that. But again, if you ever read Louis de Montfort, I've actually got his collected works next to me here. If you ever read him on Hermeticism or alchemy, he is not friendly to these paths of wisdom.
Interesting.
And so you have you have the Valentin Tomberg, who, as everyone probably knows by now, is a bit of a hero of mine. Repeatedly, when referring to the Virgin, calls her Mary Sophia. He hyphenates Mary Sophia all the time because he's trying to emphasize the cosmic role of Mary as the embodiment of the primordial Sophia who is animating the created order and emanating from God. And that's why the created order can be the queen consort of God, precisely because this divine feminine Sophia is gendering the whole of the universe. And therefore the universe is glorifying and responding in a spousal way to God as he is animating and being the active principle, holding it in being, and there's this incredible matrimonial dance going on between creator and creation. And so, of course, the whole of creation is feminine. And yet, repeatedly within the church's tradition, you get a kind of pathological nervousness about this, which is very unfortunate.
Yeah, interesting. I think you're right to push back. In the Old Testament, there is this, as you say, this divine wisdom figure that's in the feminine. But interestingly, she doesn't make an appearance as a in a cultic way, more as just a kind of quiet whisper among the sages.
I don't think she can. I don't think she can make an appearance in a cultic way in the religion of the Israelites until the moment of the incarnation.
Right, exactly. Well, I'm not even sure whether it's the moment of the incarnation. I think, not to split hairs too much, but that there is an important distinction. I think Scott Hahn does some very good work on this, between Mary before the crucifixion and the Mary that stands before the crucified Christ, who becomes the kind of eschatological woman. She's almost... there's a transformation that takes place, because Christ on the cross is Christ on the tree of life, in the way that the tree of life is the fruits of the tree of life, or what we take and eat, and he is the fruit of the tree of life, and the tree of life is holding him up there on Golgotha, and it's at that point there's the revelation of the fullness of instantiated revelation in the people. So I don't mean too much to split hairs, but it just seems, I think the cross is more important for that, and then the effects go backwards in some sense from the cross as that pivotal moment in history back to his nativity.
Well, not just to the nativity, to the Immaculate Conception, right? And that's why I think the tradition lays emphasis on the Immaculate Conception, certainly in the last century or so since the dogmatic definition, because the Immaculate Conception is the realization of the meritorious effects of the cross prior to its event in history. So the mystery of the Immaculate Conception renders the merits of the crucifixion cosmic, right? Which you would expect to happen in the life of Mary, because she's the incarnation of the cosmos, right? That's exactly what you would expect. And it's interesting because in the traditional Roman rite, the first reading for the feast of the Immaculate Conception is taken from the wisdom literature. It's Proverbs chapter 8, verses 22 to 35. And I'll just read a little bit of it here to get a sense of, this is really to illustrate what you were saying earlier, Brian, that a lot of this stuff, if you really want to understand the depth of what is being conveyed here by, in the end, the Holy Ghost, because it's the Holy Ghost who's given to us as the Paraclete to lead us into all truth until the consummation of the world. So, and the Paraclete is always operating through the church and its bridal liturgical expression. And this is the reading for the Immaculate Conception. The Lord possessed me in the beginning of his ways, before he made anything from the beginning. I was set from all eternity and of old, before the earth was made. The depths were not as yet, and I was already conceived. By the way, this is Sophia speaking in Proverbs, right? This is Mary Sophia, as Tomberg calls her, speaking in the book of Proverbs. She continues, the depths were not as yet, and I was already conceived. Neither had the fountains of waters as yet sprung out. The mountains, with their huge bulk, had not as yet been established. Before the hills I was brought forth. He had not yet made the earth, nor the rivers, nor the poles of the world. When he prepared the heavens, I was present, And then it goes on. There are several more paragraphs of just this unveiling of the operation of the divine Sophia, holding the whole cosmic order in being from all eternity. It's the perfect. It's a
fascinating
reading.
Verse.
Oh,
and
just gorgeous.
It causes real problems to anyone who tries to fit Christ into that, because you end up with a kind of you arguing against an almost bulletproof Arian case. And this was what many of the fathers ended up doing, that they made very unconvincing arguments in this area, giving fuel to Arianism, because it's very much talking about a created being. It's not something that's there from all eternity. But something that's created before all of creation, in the darkness. So this comes to the darkness of the Black Madonnas, and I think this is a good springboard into talking about that. Of course, in the 11th and 12th centuries, the Madonnas emerged from grottos. Some of them were found by people under trees or underground.
Or inside trees.
Inside trees. They were sometimes found by animals, and they were promoted by the Benedictine and Cistercian orders. This was a movement of the mystics and the regular clergy.
So do you think this might be a good spot, a good moment to talk a little bit about the metaphysics of the Black Madonna?
Absolutely, because really that's what the blackness is. The blackness isn't an indication of the ancient African emergence of man or anything like that. It's a metaphysical statement. Tell me about it.
Well, when you have darkness, you don't have something. You have an absence of light, right? And so the darkness of the Black Madonna's skin is symbolic of the material principle as pure potency. And in Aristotelian and Thomistic metaphysics that the Church has largely accepted and made her own, this is exactly how matter is understood. Matter is the principle of pure potency. That's why materialism, that sees matter as the only thing or the most real thing, has got reality completely on its head. And that shouldn't surprise us, because that's what modernity does. Modernity takes reality and puts it on its head. Matter in traditional metaphysics, matter is only something when it has been actualized by form. And form is a principle of intelligibility. So form is logos, and it responds to pure potency. So what you have in the blackness of the Black Madonna's skin is Mary as icon of materia prima. And this is very important, because that's exactly her role in the mystery of the incarnation. She gives to the eternal word the body and the blood, right? She gives to the eternal word his body. So you have three things taking place at the incarnation. You have, if you like, the descent. I mean, that's a slightly Cartesian term in this sense, but you have the descent into the created order of the eternal logos, the assumption from Mary of the body and the blood to form Christ's body, and then to form his sacred humanity, you have a created soul, the soul of Christ. And so you have these three principles coming together to make the one divine person with a human nature, with the sacred humanity of Jesus Christ. And insofar as Christ is visible and walking among us, that the disciples saw Christ as an embodied person, what they saw was Marian, because his entire bodily constitution had been received exclusively from her. And so she is the generator of the material principle, because she is materia prima. And that's why among the alchemists, the Black Madonna is the queen of alchemy, and she's the alchemical queen, precisely because in alchemy, whistle stop tour, for those who don't know, you require the philosopher's stone in order to reduce a base metal to materia prima so as to impose on it a new form, and in that new form you get gold. And that's exactly what you have in Mary. You have this fallen world, this fallen world racked by sin, and somehow you have the reduction,
reduced by Christ the philosopher's stone to materia prima,
right, from
to produce gold.
Christ's cross is Christ's sacrifice on the cross is the philosopher's stone, because that is the thing that affects the Immaculate Conception prior to its historical event.
Right.
You have corrupted, sinful matter, the universe, taunted and marred by the disobedience of man, specifically by the disobedience of Eve. And then you have it reduced to pure potency, and then actuated by the philosopher's stone into pure gold. And that's Mary. Mary is pure gold. And so, insofar as she is the icon of pure potency, of materia prima, of the universal, material, maternal, feminine principle that is the universe, and therefore can have this spousal relationship with the Creator, insofar as she is that, she is black, right? And that is why there is this kind of very deep metaphysics going on in the image that we have of the Black Madonna.
Before we carry on that particular stream, I just thought it'd be worth just disentangling materia prima itself as a word, because materia it's not a coincidence that sounds like martyr, the Latin word
exactly
for mother.
The same root. It has exactly the same root, etymology. Yeah.
And maris for the sea, the stella maris, the star of the sea.
Yeah.
All of these words are pregnant with the perennial wisdom of the mother. So when we say that the Mary is not only the materia prima but the great mother, that's because the words themselves, in their very most fundamental meaning, tie that all together. And the sea, so not just the earth but the sea, in the same sense that the sea is the potency above which the spirit glides in Genesis and in baptism of Christ. So where the new creation is initiated through baptism. So the first creation that happens on the materia prima of the waters, which is exactly the same thing analogically as the materia prima of Mary, and then in creation renewed in the second creation as Christ is baptized, not just out of a sense of obedience or to do the things that we do, but because in being baptized, Christ cleanses the waters and brings them into their original state, which is why when you and I get baptized, we are baptized with the holy water purified by Christ's body. So the waters, the Magna Mater, all of these things are bound together in the name. Now, I don't have the expertise to go any further on this, but the original Hebrew writing of the word Mariam, which is Mary's name, is pregnant with hieroglyphical magical meaning, which instantiates everything that we're talking about. In the Black Virgin, Jean Hani distills some of this research, and the French are so far ahead on this. There are a number of very important esoteric theological works on Mary, or works that talk very importantly about some of the mystery of Mary that are only available in French. But in his book, he represents some of this work, and the stuff on each of the Hebrew hieroglyphs, which is what originally the Hebrew language was a kind of a mystical hieroglyphical system, and which shouldn't surprise us either, because it's Moses, the antitype of Christ, is a prince of Egypt. He comes out of Egypt and brings with him the mysteries of Egypt. There's all of the Egyptian mysteries. It's not a coincidence that we find the same mystery language in the Hebrew religion as in the Egyptian religion. And if people want sort of a really provocative example, that the mysteries of the Egyptians at their very center had serpentine mysteries, the serpent wisdom and serpent gnosis, you might even say, initiation. And yet the Hebrews under Moses are also saved by looking up to a serpent on a bronze staff, to which Jesus indicates he is identifying, and even more mysteriously, and this is particularly mysterious, because at the very heart of the Eleusinian mysteries, which were the kind of the pinnacle of Greek mystery religion, there was the final stage of the initiate, the final secret that they would have revealed to them would be that there is a basket in the darkness of a cave with a snake inside. And this is almost indisputably parallel to the mystery of the Ark of the Covenant, which has the three great mysteries of Christ. It's got the manna, which is Christ, the bread of life. It's got the tablets of the law, Christ the law, Christ the Logos. But finally, and the hardest to understand and the one that's most ignored and least talked about, is the staff of Aaron that sprouts new life. And this is indicative of Christ's priesthood. But the staff of Aaron also turns into a serpent, which devours the serpents of the Egyptians.
That's right.
And once again, the serpent wisdom at the heart of the Christian mystery is revealed. But it's a secret because it's still a staff.
And finding a serpent in a basket is exactly what happened to the Magi. The Magi traveled across the desert, having read and understood the grammar of the stars, having followed their astrological charts, and they came to a cave where there was a basket or a trough, and in it lay a serpent, the serpent who would be held up in the desert for the redemption of the world, which is exactly what Christ calls himself. He talks about the bronze serpent that Moses held up, which cured the Israelites of their serpentine attacks, and Christ calls himself that serpent, and that is the serpent that, of course, the Magi find in a cave in a basket.
Fascinating. So going back, so link that all links back into the blackness of the Black Madonna, because it is in the Egyptian religion that the meditations on the mysteries of black are taken to their highest form. In fact, you could say that the land of Egypt was one great sacramental engine for transformation into an eternal existence and eternal life. The entire temple system was designed to effecate, and the land of Egypt was called Al-Kem, or Kem, the black. Which is where we get the word alchemy from. The Egyptians, as part of their very linguistic structure, referred to their own land as the black. And at the same time, they meditated on the mysteries of the blackness of the heart. So the land itself was the heart of the world and was a kind of mesocosmic representation of the microcosmic heart inside the human being. And the blackness was indicative of the initiatory process that Egyptian religion and the mystery religions in general put people through as they went down into a cave or a grotto or a cavern into the darkness to symbolically die before being brought back to renewed life, to new life. And this this darkness wasn't so the land of Egypt was both the darkness of the heart, it was also the darkness of the womb, and it was also the darkness of the grave. So you would descend into the darkness of the grave, die, and be born in the darkness of the womb, which was the same womb as it's identical to the grave, the womb and the grave, in the same way as the Christian cathedral is both the womb of Mary and the grave of each and every individual. And the process of rebirth that happens in the initiatory process of that darkness is also what is symbolized by the blackness of Isis, which is the same blackness properly manifest in the flesh of Mary.
And the Christian cathedrals, as they become more cosmic as we go into the medieval age, there's this incredible proliferation of churches and cathedrals being consecrated to Mary and being filled with statues of the Black Madonna. Just going back to the Egyptian mysteries, it's worth noting that this, of course, makes its way across the Mediterranean because Pythagoras goes and studies under the great initiatory masters of Egypt, and then he brings that wisdom tradition back with him. And then downstream from that, you get the entire theurgical tradition within Greece, the last great teacher of which is probably Iamblichus, and we know a lot about theurgical initiatory exercises from his writings, which, if anyone's interested in that, were very helpfully translated in the 18th century by Thomas Taylor, and can be his work on this can be bought at a very low. Oh, actually, I have it here on my desk. Iamblichus on the Mysteries, translated by Thomas Taylor. And
even though it's an old translation, it's particularly worth it because he actually understood the tradition from the inside, unlike modern academic translators who don't understand, don't necessarily have any kind of affinity to the religious tradition.
He really practiced this stuff, and his footnotes and his introduction to the text is really great. Anyway, the point is that these theurgical masters would go deep into the belly of the earth. They would go into these caves, and they would encounter the gods, right? The veil that obscures our apprehension of reality would drop through their initiatory rituals and their prayers and their dances and the lighting of fire and all of these things that they were doing that would put them into an alternative state of consciousness. And this Mediterranean theurgical exercise gets synthesized with temple worship and chant through the line from Israel, and essentially that all gets baptized, and that's what we mean by Christian liturgy. It's unfortunately, after the liturgical reforms of the 1960s, this is almost impossible to detect now, but that is actually what Christian liturgy is. And if anyone attends a pontifical mass or a high mass in the ancient Roman rite, you will see something of this in the chanting, in the singing, in the gestures, in the ranks of priests and acolytes and crucifers and thurifers and everything that's going on in this sacred temple. That is theurgy baptized, right?
And so when Protestants accuse Catholics of having a pagan religion, that they're actually making a good point, but what they're missing is that there is nothing else upon which to build a religion, because the pagans had natural revelation, and all of these traditions are a conversation with that, to greater or lesser degree purified. If you try and get rid of that, it's like trying to get rid of the materia prima. Like it's impossible.
Well, that's literally the definition of a European. A European is a baptized pagan, right? In fact, it's basically the definition of a Christian now. There are very few baptized Jews, and even those who are, they only have half of the religion of Christ anyway, because the temple and the sacrifice and the Levitical priesthood doesn't exist. Judaism today is a purely rabbinical religion. It's not the same religion with the same practice and the same liturgies as the ancient religion of the Israelites. And so it's a different kettle of fish, really. And so what a Christian is essentially a baptized pagan. And that is the nature of Christianity. What it does is it baptizes. Well, it baptizes nature, essentially. I mean, that is the nature-supernature relation and distinction. That is what Christianity does. It baptizes nature. And so you shouldn't be surprised by the fact that Christianity is baptized theology. What else could it possibly be? And once you lose that sense, actually what ends up happening is you don't just get a pure liturgy, you just don't get any liturgy at all, which is largely what has happened in Protestantism. I think we're going to lose track if we just don't drill home this notion and really kind of insist on this, that Mary is, because of everything we've been talking about, completely and utterly bound up with nature and creation. That is why, if you look up into the sky at night, you will see an icon of Mary in the moon, because the moon is feminine and she stands with the moon under her feet. If you look up into the sky in the daytime, you will see a blanket of blue, and that is because the world is surrounded by a blanket of the color of wisdom. Blue is always the color of wisdom. You see this icon of Mary. If you look down into the ground, you see Mary. Mary is always found in grottos under the earth, in cliff faces. She's bound up with the earth. In Germany and Austria, she's referred to as Our Lady of the Fields. If you look across a rural landscape, you will see Mary everywhere you look. I encourage our listeners to look at the painting by Carlo Crivelli, which was painted, I think, in the 15th century, called the Immaculate Conception. It's the earliest image of the Immaculate Conception. The Immaculate Conception is a dogma that is intimately bound up with the cosmic mystery of Mary, because for the reasons that we said, she is the universe transmutated into gold, precisely so that she can give to the Logos the body necessary for the incarnation. The Immaculate Conception is totally cosmic, and if you look at that painting by Carlo Crivelli, what do you see? She's got flowers next to her, lilies, aubergines, courgettes, pears, apples. She's cloaked with this great robe that's covered in vines and flowers and leaves. The entire universe is bound up with her mystery, and that is when I finished reading that book that you encouraged me to read, going back quite some time now, the Black Virgin by Hani. I remember having this experience of finishing that book and going for a long hike with my dog through the woods and then out into the fields and looking around, and the whole world looked like Mary. The whole world was Marian. That book completely, it's overused to call books life-changing or whatever, but that book comes jolly close, right? And
for myself as well, absolutely.
Yeah, this is what people need to realize. Christians need to realize they need to get out of their heads. They need to stop seeing everything as just, Christianity is whatever you can defend on Twitter, or that Catholicism is just another internet genre or another species of ideology. To be a Christian is to be enmeshed in the most amazing cosmic drama, and you really realize that when you induct yourself very deeply into cosmic mariology, I think.
Esto fez a mim.